welcome to Mail Story. If you enjoy stories, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next ones.
My boyfriend went to Vegas instead of my cancer surgery and posted single and ready to mingle. He's terminally single now. My boyfriend Jake had been planning this Vegas trip for 3 months. Not 3 months before my diagnosis. 3 months after. He'd known about my surgery date the entire time but kept telling his friends it was flexible, that I could reschedule if needed. The boys only get together once a year, babe, he'd said while browsing flight deals on his laptop. This cancer thing will work itself out around our plans. The trip was supposed to be 5 days of poker, drinking, and strip clubs with his college roommates. When the surgeon called with my surgery date, Jake was sitting right next to me. February 15th, 7 a.m. check-in. The tumor was growing faster than expected. We needed to move quickly. Jake pulled out his phone and checked his calendar. That's the same morning as my flight to Vegas. Can't you get them to do it the week after? The nurse on the phone went quiet. Sir, this is time sensitive. Tumor removal doesn't wait for vacation schedules. Jake rolled his eyes and mouthed the word dramatic at me. After I hung up, he immediately called Nolan. Slight situation with Ashley's surgery thing. She's trying to guilt me into canceling. But don't worry, I'm not that whipped. Nolan laughed through the phone. Good man. Bros before medical procedures. The night before surgery, Jake was packing his suitcase while I filled out my pre-op paperwork. He'd bought new swimming trunks and those ridiculous light-up sneakers he thought made him look 25 instead of 35. Hey, babe, he said, folding his party shirts. You don't really need me there anyway, right? It's just a routine thing. You'll be unconscious the whole time. I reminded him it was a 4-hour surgery. Major organs were involved. Recovery would be brutal. Jake zipped his suitcase. That's what nurses are for. Plus, your mom will probably show up. She loves playing the worried parent. It'll give her something to do. At 5 a.m., while I was getting ready to leave for the hospital, Jake was doing push-ups in the living room. Gotta look good for the pool parties, he explained. Can't show up in Vegas with a dad bod. His Uber to the airport arrived at the same time as my taxi to the hospital. He kissed my forehead quickly, careful not to mess up his hair gel. Text me when you're out, but not too many times. International roaming is expensive. I wasn't going to Canada. Vegas was 3 states away. But Jake had already grabbed his bags and headed out the door. His friend Rico was picking up Nolan and meeting him at the airport. They'd coordinated their outfits. I checked into the hospital alone. The intake nurse asked for my emergency contact. I gave her my cousin Diana's number. She lived 2 hours away but promised to drive down after work. The nurse frowned at the forms. No spouse or partner listed? I have a boyfriend. He's in Vegas. The nurse's expression changed to something between pity and disgust. The anesthesiologist came to prep me. He went through the risks, the complications, what could go wrong. Who's waiting for you? He asked. My cousin might make it by tonight. He made a note in my chart. The surgery took 6 hours, not 4. Complications with the tumor location. It had wrapped around more tissue than the scans showed. I woke up alone in recovery, disoriented and in pain. The nurse checking my vitals mentioned that no one had called to check on me. My phone had 14 notifications. 13 were from my credit card company about unusual charges. 1 was from Jake. A photo of him at a blackjack table with the caption, "Living my best life." That evening, Diana finally arrived. She was horrified. Where's Jake? Why isn't he here? Vegas. Boys' trip. She pulled out her phone immediately. I'm calling him. The call went straight to voicemail. He'd turned off his phone to avoid roaming charges that didn't exist. The second day post-op, while I was learning to walk again, Jake posted an Instagram story from a pool party. The caption read, "Single and ready to mingle." His friends were tagged. The location was tagged. The bottle service girls were tagged. I was not mentioned anywhere. The billing department came by on day 3. There was an issue with my insurance. The policy showed Jake as my domestic partner, which meant he needed to authorize certain coverage as the primary on the account. We'd been living together 3 years. He'd insisted on adding me to his plan because it was cheaper than me having my own. But now he wasn't answering his phone. The insurance company tried calling him 6 times. Each call went to voicemail. The hospital administrator came to my room. Without authorization, you'll be responsible for the full amount. We're looking at approximately $200,000. Can you try reaching Mr. Kelly again? Jake finally answered on day 4 of his trip. Not because the hospital called, not because Diana had left 17 voicemails, but because his credit card got declined at a casino ATM and he needed me to transfer money. I reached for my phone with shaking fingers and sent Jake a text. Your credit card is about to be reported stolen if you don't call me in 5 minutes. The hospital needs authorization, or I owe $200,000. I watched the 3 dots appear and disappear 4 times before my phone rang. His voice came through annoyed and distant with casino noise bleeding into the background. You're seriously doing this right now? I'm in the middle of a poker tournament. I told him about the billing crisis. about the administrator's visits, about the 18 calls he'd ignored. Jake sighed like I'd asked him to clean the garage. It's not that serious, Ash. They always say stuff like that to scare you. Just tell them I'll handle it when I get back. In the background, someone yelled about hitting blackjack, and Jake laughed. I explained that without his authorization today, the hospital would discharge me with the full bill in my name. He went quiet for 3 seconds. Can't you just sign something yourself? You're the patient. That's not how insurance works when you're the primary on the account, I said, hearing my voice crack. Jake groaned. Fine. I'll call them tomorrow morning. Maybe, if I remember. I've got a poker tournament until midnight and we're hitting the clubs after. This Vegas trip cost me $3,000, babe. I'm not wasting it dealing with hospital drama. Diana had been standing by the door, but she crossed the room in 4 steps and took my phone from my hands. Her voice came out low and controlled in a way I'd never heard before. You have 2 hours to call the insurance company and authorize Ashley's coverage. 2 hours, Jake. Or I'm contacting an attorney about financial abandonment of a vulnerable person during a medical crisis. Jake laughed. Actually laughed. You're going to get a lawyer? For what? Ashley's fine. She's talking to me right now. Diana's jaw tightened. You abandoned your girlfriend during cancer surgery to party in Vegas. You've ignored 18 calls from her hospital. You're letting her face $200,000 in medical debt because you're too busy gambling. That's financial abuse and medical neglect of a domestic partner. 2 hours. She hung up before he could respond and immediately opened her laptop. I watched her search attorneys specializing in domestic partnership dissolution, her fingers moving fast across the keyboard. She pulled up 3 different law firm websites and started taking notes. Diana, I said weakly, we don't need to do that. He'll call. She looked at me with something between pity and fury. Ashley, he's in Vegas posting pool party photos while you're in a hospital bed facing financial ruin. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is who he is. The insurance authorization went through at 11:30 that night. Diana's phone rang and Jake's mother was on the other end, her voice thick with tears. I had no idea. Diana, I swear I had no idea Jake did this. Is Ashley okay? Diana put the phone on speaker, and Jake's mom apologized for 20 minutes straight. She'd called Jake the second Diana hung up, screamed at him for an hour, and forced him to handle the insurance paperwork immediately. She wanted to know what hospital I was in so she could visit. She wanted to send flowers. She wanted to know if I needed anything at all. Diana thanked her and promised to call with updates, then ended the call gently. I sat in the hospital bed staring at the wall. Jake's own mother had to shame him into basic human decency. The woman who raised him had to force him to do the bare minimum to prevent me from drowning in medical debt. Diana sat on the edge of my bed and took my hand. I know this hurts. I know you wanted him to do the right thing on his own. I nodded because I couldn't speak around the lump in my throat. The hospital discharged me on day 7 with a list of restrictions and a bag full of medications. Diana drove me to her place instead of my apartment because I couldn't face walking into the space I shared with Jake. I couldn't face seeing his gym equipment in the corner, or his protein powder on the counter, or the vacation photos on the fridge from trips he'd actually shown up for. Diana's guest room was small and plain with cream-colored walls and a bed covered in a blue quilt. She helped me sit on the edge of the mattress and I felt something crack open inside my chest. Everything spilled out. The years of Jake dismissing my concerns. The times he'd made me feel needy for wanting support. The way he'd convinced me I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. How he'd turned every problem into evidence of my flaws instead of his neglect. Diana sat beside me and wrapped her arms around my shoulders while I cried. When I finally stopped, she said quietly that she'd suspected for years that Jake was manipulating me. I wanted to say something, she admitted, but I was scared you'd pull away from me if I criticized him. I see that now. I should have spoken up sooner. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Flying home early. Vegas got boring. We need to talk about us. I stared at the message, feeling something twist in my stomach. Diana read it over my shoulder and her mouth pressed into a thin line. That's a manipulation tactic. He's coming back on his terms, framing it like he's doing you a favor instead of acknowledging what he did wrong. Watch. He'll act like the bigger person for cutting his trip short. I felt my resolve waver because part of me desperately wanted to believe Jake was genuinely sorry. Part of me wanted him to walk through the door and prove everyone wrong. Diana must have seen it on my face because she squeezed my hand. You don't have to decide anything right now. Just watch what he does. Watch how he talks about this. People show you who they are if you pay attention. Jake showed up at Diana's house 3 days later without warning. I heard the doorbell and Diana's sharp voice asking what he was doing here. Then Jake's voice, smooth and apologetic, saying he needed to see me. Diana let him in but positioned herself between us. Jake was holding roses and wearing the shirt I told him looked good 6 months ago. He launched into an apology that sounded rehearsed, hitting all the right emotional notes. I was processing my fear about your cancer. Seeing you sick scared me so much I couldn't handle being at the hospital. I ran away because I was terrified of losing you. I escaped to Vegas because I didn't know how else to cope with the trauma of watching you face something so serious. His eyes were wet and his voice broke in exactly the right places. I watched Diana's face turn red, watched her hands curl into fists at her sides. Jake kept talking about his fear, his trauma, his pain at seeing me go through surgery. He made himself the victim of my cancer, the wounded party who'd been forced to watch someone he loved suffer. Diana cut him off mid-sentence. You need to leave. Jake's expression shifted, the apologetic mask sliding away to show irritation underneath. This is between me and Ashley. You're interfering in our relationship. Diana crossed her arms. I'm protecting my cousin from someone who abandoned her during major surgery. Jake turned to me, his voice taking on an edge. You're really going to let her poison you against me? She's jealous, Ashley. She's never had a real relationship and she can't stand that we have something good. You need to choose. Her bitterness, or the man you've built a life with for 3 years? I felt frozen, caught between Jake's anger and Diana's protective fury. My mouth wouldn't work. My brain couldn't form words. Jake kept pushing. This is ridiculous. Your surgery wasn't even that serious. You survived fine without me there. The nurses took care of everything. Something snapped inside me when he said that. I heard my own voice, distant and cold, telling him to get out. Jake's face went soft again, switching tactics. Babe, come on, let's talk about this. He moved toward me with his arms open, but I recoiled, pressing back against the couch. Diana stepped between us, her body a barrier. Jake's jaw clenched. You're going to regret this. You're choosing her bitterness over our love, over everything we built together. You'll see. She'll get tired of playing savior and you'll be alone. He grabbed his roses off the table and walked out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. I was shaking, my whole body trembling like I'd been standing in cold water. But underneath the fear and confusion, I felt something else. Anger. Real anger, hot and sharp, replacing the numb acceptance I'd been carrying for years. Diana and I went to the apartment the next morning while Jake was at work. She'd called his office to confirm he'd be there until 5. My hands shook as I unlocked the door, but Diana squeezed my shoulder and followed me inside. The apartment smelled stale, like old takeout and unwashed laundry. Walking into the bedroom felt like entering a crime scene. The sheets were still the same ones from before my surgery, wrinkled and unmade. Jake hadn't changed them in 9 days. On his nightstand sat a pile of receipts from Vegas hotels and restaurants. Diana picked one up and her eyebrows shot up. This shows charges for 2 people in his room. Room service for 2. Minibar charges. She pulled out her phone and started photographing everything. The unmade bed, the receipts. The Instagram photos still open on Jake's laptop showing him with his arm around different women at pool parties. I moved through the room mechanically, packing clothes into a duff case. My medications from the bathroom, my laptop from the desk, my favorite books from the shelf. Diana kept taking pictures, documenting everything with the calm efficiency of someone building a case. My hands were steady now, the shaking replaced by something cold and focused. I zipped the duff case closed and looked around the bedroom one last time. This place didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like evidence. I moved to the kitchen to grab my water bottle from the counter. Jake's laptop sat there, screen still glowing. He'd left it open when he ran out. My hand reached for the water, but my eyes caught the email window. His inbox was right there, messages from the past week scattered across the screen. I shouldn't have looked. But I did. The first email was from Nolan with the subject line, Vegas Aftermath. I clicked it without thinking. Nolan had written about how epic the trip was, how Jake needed to dump the dead weight and get back to being fun. Jake's response made my stomach turn. He called me clingy, said I was being dramatic about the surgery, told Nolan he was already planning his exit strategy. I scrolled up. There was another email from 3 weeks before my surgery. Jake had written to Nolan explaining his plan. He was done playing nurse to someone who was falling apart. The Vegas trip was his last hurrah before he broke things off. He'd already decided to leave me before I even went under the knife. Diana appeared behind me and read over my shoulder. She didn't say anything at first, just pulled out her phone and started forwarding every email to my account. She worked fast, clicking through messages and sending them to herself too. Jake had written similar things to Rico, to another friend named Noah I'd never met. All of them knew he was planning to abandon me. All of them cheered him on. Diana finished forwarding and closed the laptop carefully. She took my hand and led me back to the couch. I felt numb, like someone had unplugged something vital inside me. The emails proved everything. This wasn't a mistake or bad judgment. Jake had planned this. He'd chosen Vegas, knowing exactly what it meant. 3 days later, I sat in the surgeon's office for my follow-up appointment. The waiting room was full of people with family members, spouses holding hands, adult children taking notes. I filled out the post-op questionnaire alone. Diana had offered to come, but she had a work presentation she couldn't miss. I told her I'd be fine. The nurse called my name and walked me back to an exam room. She asked how I was feeling, if I had anyone waiting for me outside. I said no. She made a note on her tablet. The surgeon came in looking serious. She sat down across from me and pulled up my scan results on the computer screen. The margins weren't as clean as she'd hoped. Some of the tumor cells had spread further than the imaging showed. She used words like aggressive and persistent. I needed 6 weeks of radiation therapy starting immediately. 5 days a week. The oncology department could fit me in starting Monday. She asked if I had questions. I asked if I could die from this. She said the radiation would significantly improve my odds, but we needed to move fast. I asked if I needed someone with me for the treatments. She said most patients brought support, but it wasn't required. The nurse came back in after the surgeon left. She handed me a folder with information about the radiation schedule, side effects, what to expect. Then she gave me another pamphlet. Support groups for cancer patients without family help. She said sometimes people going through treatment alone found it useful to connect with others in similar situations. Her voice was gentle, but I heard the pity underneath. I took the pamphlet and thanked her. Walking out to my car, I realized something strange. I felt relieved Jake wasn't there. I didn't have to manage his reactions or comfort him about my cancer. I didn't have to watch him make my diagnosis about his feelings. For the first time since my surgery, I felt like I could actually focus on getting better, instead of managing someone else's emotional breakdown. That evening, I drove to the hospital's community center for the support group meeting. The room was small, with chairs arranged in a circle and a table with coffee and cookies nobody touched. About 12 people sat scattered around, most of them older than me. A woman with a scarf covering her head smiled and gestured to the empty chair next to her. I sat down, and the group leader started talking about this week's topic, which was dealing with isolation during treatment. People took turns sharing their stories. A man talked about his kids being too busy to visit. A woman described her husband leaving her 2 weeks after her diagnosis. When it was my turn, I explained about the surgery and Jake going to Vegas. The room went quiet. The woman next to me reached over and squeezed my hand. After the meeting ended, she approached me while I was putting on my coat. She looked familiar somehow, like I'd seen her face before but couldn't place where. She introduced herself as Melody Clark. The name hit me like cold water. Jake's ex-girlfriend from 5 years ago. I'd seen her picture once on his old Facebook before he untagged himself from everything. Her face went pale when I said my name. She asked if I was dating Jake Kelly. I said yes, we'd been together 3 years. She looked like she might be sick. She asked if we could talk privately, maybe grab coffee somewhere nearby. My stomach twisted with dread, but I agreed. We walked to a coffee shop 2 blocks away and sat in a corner booth away from other customers. Melody ordered tea and didn't touch it. She pulled out her phone and opened old text messages, scrolling back years. She explained that Jake had abandoned her during a medical crisis too. She'd needed emergency gallbladder surgery, and he'd gone to a music festival instead. Told her it was non-refundable, that she'd be fine, that hospitals had staff for a reason. She showed me the texts. Jake had called her dramatic, said she was being needy, told her she was ruining his good time by guilt-tripping him. 2 weeks after her surgery, he broke up with her, said she'd become too depressing and he couldn't handle being around someone so negative all the time. The language was almost identical to things he'd said to me. Melody scrolled through more messages. She showed me texts where Jake complained to mutual friends about her recovery taking too long, about her asking for help with basic things like grocery shopping, about her crying too much and making everything about her health problems. I felt sick reading them because I could hear Jake's voice in every word. She said she'd spent months thinking it was her fault, that she'd been too needy, too weak, too much of a burden. Then she started hearing stories from other women. A girl Jake dated in college who'd broken her leg and he'd ghosted her during recovery. Another ex who'd had a family emergency and he'd complained she was too focused on family drama. Melody had realized Jake had a pattern. He dated women, enjoyed them when things were good, then discarded them the moment they showed real vulnerability or needed actual support. She'd tried to warn a few people over the years, but Jake was charming and nobody believed her. When she saw me at the support group and heard my story, she knew she had to say something. She couldn't watch him do this to someone else and stay quiet. I sat there processing everything she'd told me. The pattern was so clear now. Jake didn't want a partner. He wanted someone convenient who made him look good and asked for nothing. The second I needed something real from him, he'd already planned his exit. The next morning, I called the attorney Diana had recommended. Nina Taylor specialized in domestic partnership dissolution. Her office was downtown in a building with security and marble floors. She met me in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. I brought everything Diana had forwarded from Jake's laptop. The emails about dumping me. The Vegas receipts showing charges for 2 people in his hotel room. Melody's text messages showing his pattern. Nina spread it all across the table and read through everything carefully. She made notes on a legal pad, occasionally asking questions about our living situation. After an hour, she leaned back and explained my situation. Because we'd lived together 3 years with shared finances, this was legally complex. Our state recognized common law marriage under certain conditions. We'd filed joint tax returns. I was on his insurance as a domestic partner. We had a shared bank account. We split rent and utilities. All of that created legal entanglement that couldn't just be walked away from. Nina said Jake would likely fight to keep shared assets. He'd probably claim everything was his because his name was on the lease and most purchases went through his credit cards. She'd seen cases like this before. Men who wanted all the benefits of a partnership, but none of the responsibilities when things ended. The process could get expensive and ugly. But she knew how to protect my interests. She could document my financial contributions over 3 years. Prove I had legal claim to half of shared property. Make sure Jake couldn't just kick me out and keep everything we'd built together. She warned me this might take months. Jake would probably hire his own attorney and try to paint me as unstable or vindictive. But with the evidence I had, especially the emails and Melody's testimony about his pattern, we had a strong case. I signed the retainer agreement and left her office feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope mixed with determination. Jake thought he could just walk away. He was wrong. My first radiation appointment was scheduled for Monday morning at 8. I checked in at the oncology department and filled out more paperwork. The waiting room had the same sad quiet as the surgery floor. People with bald heads and tired eyes. I was called back to a prep room where a technician explained the process, the machine, the positioning, the side effects I might experience. She asked again if anyone was coming to pick me up after. I said no. She gave me the same pitying look everyone else had. The actual treatment took 20 minutes. I lay still on a table while the machine hummed and rotated around me. Afterwards, I felt fine physically, but exhausted emotionally. I walked out to the parking lot and saw Jake leaning against my car. He had flowers. His eyes were red like he'd been crying. I stopped walking, my keys tight in my hand. He pushed off the car and came toward me with his arms open. He said he'd been an idiot, that seeing me go through treatment without him made him realize how much he loved me. He couldn't lose me. He'd brought printouts of couples therapists he wanted us to see. He'd already called 3 offices to check availability. He was ready to do the work. Ready to be the partner I deserved. I watched him perform this scene in the hospital parking lot. Other patients walked past us. A nurse getting off shift glanced over with curiosity. Jake kept talking, his voice breaking at all the right moments. He grabbed my hands and squeezed them. Please come home. Please give him another chance. He'd changed. He saw everything clearly now. I pulled my hands away. The exhaustion I felt wasn't from the radiation. It was from watching him try to manipulate me again. From recognizing every tactic Nina had warned me about. The tears, the promises, the therapy suggestion. All of it designed to pull me back in before I could fully get away. I told Jake I wanted to separate our finances and living situation. His tears stopped like someone flipped a switch. His face hardened into something cold and angry. He stepped back and crossed his arms. Fine. If that's what I wanted. But I should know the apartment lease was in his name only. Most of our furniture was purchased with his credit cards. The TV, the couch, the bedroom set, all his. I had no legal right to anything we'd accumulated together. I could take my personal clothes and belongings, but everything else stayed. He'd been generous letting me live there for 3 years, but that was over now. I could find my own place and buy my own furniture. See how I liked being alone with nothing. I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. A text from Nina. She'd warned me Jake would respond exactly like this. She'd prepared me for this conversation. I told Jake my attorney would be in touch about division of shared property. His eyes widened. Attorney? I was really doing this? Over what, him taking one trip? I was insane. Vindictive. Using my cancer to punish him for one mistake. I walked past him to my car and got in. He banged on the window, but I started the engine. Drove out of the parking lot while he stood there yelling. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, but I kept driving. Back to Diana's place where I could breathe without someone trying to manipulate me into staying. 2 days later, I got a Facebook message from someone named Cody. The profile picture showed a guy in his 30s at a baseball game. The message said he was Jake's college roommate and he needed to tell me something important about Vegas. He knew this was weird, reaching out like this, but his conscience wouldn't let him stay quiet anymore. Could we meet for coffee? I showed Diana the message. She said it could be a trick, Jake trying to get information about what I was planning. But something about the message felt genuine. I agreed to meet Cody at a coffee shop downtown the next afternoon. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table looking uncomfortable. He stood up when he saw me and shook my hand formally. He ordered coffee for both of us and then pulled out his phone. He said he'd been friends with Jake since freshman year. Watched him go through relationship after relationship with the same pattern. But Vegas had been too much. He couldn't watch Jake manipulate me and pretend everything was fine. Cody showed me photos from the trip. Jake at pool parties with his arms around different women. Jake at nightclubs making out with a blonde girl while Nolan took pictures. Videos of Jake telling strangers at a bar that he was newly single and celebrating his freedom. Receipts from strip clubs. More hotel charges showing room service for 2 people. Cody scrolled through everything slowly, letting me see each piece of evidence. He explained that he'd stayed quiet initially out of loyalty. Jake was his friend. But then he'd seen Jake show up at the hospital crying and begging. Watched him try to manipulate me into coming back. Cody said he couldn't be part of that anymore. He had a sister who'd been in an abusive relationship, and watching Jake operate made him sick. He'd told Jake he was done covering for him. Jake had called him a traitor and blocked his number. But Cody didn't care anymore. He wanted me to have proof of what really happened in Vegas. I asked if I could have copies of everything. Cody had already prepared a zip file and emailed it to me while we sat there. He apologized for not coming forward sooner, said he hoped it helped with whatever I was planning. I thanked him and left the coffee shop with my phone full of evidence. I forwarded everything Cody sent to Nina that night. She called me an hour later. This was exactly what we needed. Documentation of Jake's behavior during my medical crisis. Proof of infidelity. Evidence that his Vegas trip wasn't innocent. Combined with the emails and Melody's testimony, we had a strong case for dissolution of the partnership and division of assets. Nina said she'd file paperwork immediately. Formal separation documents, request for division of shared property, demand that Jake either buy out my half of furniture and household items or allow me to take equivalent value. She'd also include the medical insurance situation and request compensation for the stress he'd caused during my treatment. The documents would be served to Jake at his office within 3 days. Nina warned me he'd probably react badly. Men like Jake didn't handle consequences well. I should be prepared for anger, threats, attempts to turn mutual friends against me. But she'd handle all communication through legal channels. I didn't have to talk to him directly anymore. 2 days later, Jake called me 17 times in a row. I didn't answer. He left voicemails screaming about how I was destroying his reputation and financial stability over a misunderstanding about Vegas. How dare I get attorneys involved like some vindictive psycho? Everyone at his office knew now because the process server had handed him papers in front of his coworkers. I was ruining his life, making him look like a monster when all he'd done was take 1 trip with his friends. Diana listened to the voicemails with me. She said this was proof we'd made the right choice. Jake's mask had fully dropped. No more tears or therapy promises. Just rage that I'd dared to protect myself. 2 weeks later, we sat in a mediation conference room. Nina on my left, Diana on my right for moral support. Jake sat across the table with his attorney, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit who looked annoyed to be there. The mediator explained the process and asked Jake's attorney to present his client's position. Jake's lawyer started by painting me as vindictive and unstable. My cancer treatment had affected my judgment. I was lashing out at Jake because I was scared and sick. This whole separation was a trauma response, not a rational decision. Jake had made one mistake by going to Vegas, but he'd apologized repeatedly. I was using legal action to punish him for being human. Nina let him finish. Then she calmly opened her laptop and pulled up the timeline she'd prepared. Jake's abandonment during my surgery. The single and ready-to-mingle Instagram post. Hotel receipts showing charges for 2 people in his room. The emails to Nolan calling me clingy and planning to break up with me before I even had surgery. Cody's photos and videos of Jake making out with multiple women at clubs. Text messages to friends saying he was newly single and celebrating his freedom. Nina presented each piece of evidence methodically. She showed Melody's testimony about Jake's pattern with previous partners. The medical records showing I'd checked into surgery alone while Jake partied. The insurance company documentation of his refusal to answer authorization calls. Jake's attorney's face fell as Nina worked through everything. He'd clearly believed Jake's version of events. Now he was realizing his client had lied about basically everything. The mediator looked at Jake with barely concealed disgust. She strongly encouraged Jake to accept a fair settlement rather than go to court where all this evidence would become public record. Jake's attorney asked for a private consultation with his client. They stepped out of the room. Through the glass wall, I could see Jake gesturing angrily while his attorney shook his head. They came back 15 minutes later. Jake's attorney said his client was willing to discuss settlement terms. Nina went through the terms one by one. Jake would pay me $15,000 for my half of the furniture, the kitchen equipment, and everything else we'd bought together over 3 years. He'd remove me from his insurance policy immediately so I could get my own coverage. He'd release any claim to my car, which he'd tried to say was partly his, because he'd driven it twice when his was in the shop. I listened to each point and felt my shoulders relax with every concession. Diana squeezed my hand under the table. The mediator asked if I agreed to these terms. I said yes. Jake's attorney slid the papers across the table and I signed each page carefully, my hand steady despite the exhaustion from that morning's radiation session. Diana signed as my witness. Walking out of the mediator's office into the bright afternoon sun, I felt lighter than I had in years. The financial stress wasn't gone. Not with more radiation treatments ahead and my savings account nearly empty. But at least I wasn't tied to Jake anymore. Diana drove me home and we stopped for coffee on the way. She asked how I felt, and I couldn't quite explain it, just that something heavy had lifted off my chest. 3 months later, I finished my last radiation treatment on a Tuesday morning. The technician gave me a certificate and a small bell to ring, and I stood there ringing it while the other patients waiting for their appointments clapped. Austin texted me congratulations. He'd been tracking my treatment schedule and checking in every few days to see how I was managing the side effects. My studio apartment was small but completely mine. Diana had helped me move in, and we'd furnished it with things from thrift stores and yard sales. A blue couch that was worn but comfortable. Mismatched dishes that I actually liked better than the boring white set Jake had insisted on. Plants on the windowsill that I watered myself without anyone complaining about the mess. I heard through mutual friends that Jake was telling everyone I'd ruined his life over nothing, that I was his crazy ex who couldn't handle him taking one vacation. Most people who knew what actually happened had stopped talking to him. My oncologist said my prognosis was cautiously good. The margins looked clean and the radiation had done its job. I was rebuilding my savings slowly, picking up freelance work when I had energy. I'd started volunteering with the hospital support group on Thursday evenings, helping other patients who were going through treatment alone. Turning my painful experience into something that helped others feel less alone made it feel like it had meant something. I was genuinely happy being alone, learning to trust my own judgment again after years of Jake convincing me I was too sensitive or demanding.